Chapter 2: Hypnosis and the Hypnotic States. It will now be convenient to define the terms hypnosis and hypnotism, and to distinguish between them. Hypnosis is sleep, artificially induced. Hypnotism is an inclusive term for all the phenomena which may accompany that sleep. It may almost be said that the manifestations of hypnotism differ with every person hypnotized. At any rate, the phenomena are extremely variable and follow no fixed or unalterable rules. Charcot and his school admit 3 states or phases in the hypnotic sleep. Number 1, lethargy. Number 2, catalepsy. Number 3, somnambulism. The state of lethargy is characterized by deep sleep, accompanied by a varying degree of anesthesia, muscular rigidity, and hypersensitiveness of the muscles and nerves. The essential characteristic of catalepsy is muscular contraction. This is produced by a sense impression communicated to the subject whilst in the state of lethargy. Somnambulism is characterized by extreme excitement of the senses and the intellect, together with anesthesia. This phase may be produced spontaneously, or by friction on the top of the head, or by magnetic passes. Charcot, as we know, had specially studied hysterical patients, and in these, there is usually the occurrence of these 3 phases. But specialists who have experimented with healthy persons have been led to make widely varying classifications which prove the great diversity of hypnotic phenomena. Besides these 3 phases, even in hysterical patients, do not invariably follow the order laid down by Charcot. Doctors Fontaine and Sagard divide hypnosis into 3 kinds: the light, the medium, and the profound. In the light slumber, the subject's eyes are closed and his eyelids slightly agitated. The state is suggestible, but the sleeper cannot put the suggestion into practice. In the second phase, there is muscular abandon, and no movements are made save those suggested to the sleeper. In profound hypnosis, the muscles are perfectly rigid, the subject is impassive, and apparently unconscious of everything around him except the hypnotizer. M. Pierre Janet, whose researches have had such influence on hypnotic science, admits 9 different stages of hypnosis. Each of the 3 main divisions, lethargy, catalepsy, and somnambulism, being subdivided to show the points of transit from the one into the other. Catalepsy, for instance, may be either lethargic, somnambulistic, or cataleptic, and so on with the other phases. Liebel also, though he only recognized 2 states, light and profound, of hypnosis, subdivided these, the former into 4 stages, the latter into 2. Colonel de Rochas says that the trance may be either superficial or profound, and that the profound hypnosis includes, number 1, the state of intimate relation between the hypnotized and the hypnotizer. In this state, the hypnotized person sees the magnetic fluid issuing from the hypnotizer's figures. Number 2, the state of sympathy by contact, in which the hypnotized person can read the thoughts of the hypnotizer and of others with whom he may be brought in contact. Number 3, the state of lucidity, in which the sleeper is able to perceive the interior organs of his own body and those of other persons with whom he is put in communication. Number 4, the state of telepathy, in which the sensibility of the subject is so intensified that even without contact and even at a distance, he can have mental communication with a hypnotizer and receive any suggestion made to him. For Dr. Magnan, all the different states of hypnosis are no more than different degrees of one and the same state, and there are no abrupt transitions. He conceives of hypnotism as a process essentially progressive, of which all the successive steps can be traced. In some cases, says Dr. Bernheim, the subject does no more than close his eyes. In others, his limbs become rigid, and there is inertia, or the inability to make spontaneous movements. Automatic obedience, anesthesia, sensorial illusions, and induced hallucinations mark the progressive stages in the development of suggestibility, of which somnambulism is the culminating point. Dr. Koller observes that the 3 phases of hypnosis do not necessarily appear even in hysterical subjects. Some subjects pass from catalepsy into lethargy and then into somnambulism. Others only fall into somnambulism and lethargy. In others again, only somnambulism can be produced. Or the series may occur in reversed order, the state of somnambulism coming first. A certain number of healthy hypnotizable subjects, particularly women, reproduce the 3 classical states with great distinctness. But in the majority of persons, one only observes somnambulism with its many minor variants. We must make particular mention of one hypnotic phenomenon, that of fascination. Professional hypnotists make great use of this in their public performances because they find it both impresses and amuses their audiences. And Dr. Bernal, who investigated the phenomenon, gave to it the name of fascination, from its resemblance to the fascination exerted by serpents over birds. Strangely enough, fascination can only be successfully exercised on males. Females are not, as a rule, susceptible to it, perhaps because their greater nervous impressionability tends to make them pass at once into the state of catalepsy or somnambulism. Fascination is the first or preliminary stage of hypnosis. It is produced by looking the subject fixedly in the eyes, and the effect, with hysterical persons, is exceedingly rapid. Almost at once, the face is seen to flush, the pulse quickens, and the pupils of the eyes dilate. This is succeeded by insensibility to pain. The will also seems paralyzed and gives place to a slavish instinct of imitation. Dr. Bermeau cites some experiments in fascination made by him on various persons, which we will give verbatim. I asked MC to close his fist, raise it above his head, and bring it down vigorously on my shoulder. As long as I was not looking at him, he went through the action with a strength that did credit to his muscles. But when, just as he was about to strike, I suddenly fixed my eyes upon him, his arm remained suspended, with the fist closed and the limb vibrating. The power of fascination had petrified him in the very midst of his energetic action. I asked MZ to count aloud in as strong a voice as possible, 1, 2, 3, etc. Meanwhile, I regarded him closely. Soon, he began to hesitate, continued the enumeration as far as 9, and then stopped. Fascination had prevailed. Also, as an example of how imitation develops, in certain subjects, Bermeau recounts the following scene which took place after he had put MC into the state of fascination. I laughed. MC laughed also. I raised my arms. He did the same. I jumped. He jumped. I grimaced. He grimaced. I spoke, and MC repeated all my words with a perfect reproduction of their intonation. He even repeated with an exact imitation of the difficult accents, some phrases of German, Spanish, Russian, and Chinese, which were pronounced by different persons present. We now come to the important question of the proportion in which hypnotizable persons are found, and the means by which we can recognize them. Some authorities declare that, in theory, everybody is hypnotizable. But in reality and in practice, this statement requires considerable modification. Doubtless, if the hypnotizer has sufficient patience as well as skill, the hypnotic trance can be produced sooner or later in most people. But it is not to be expected that very many hypnotizers will be as persistent as a certain doctor, of whom it is recorded that he succeeded, after 70 successive seances, in putting an obstinate patient to sleep. When we speak of hypnotizable subjects, we mean persons who can be hypnotized with comparatively little trouble, and in this class may usually be included children up to the age of 15. In middle life, the number of good subjects is smaller, but an increase in the proportion again occurs towards the 60th year. Women are generally more susceptible than men, but the statistics taken of adults show great variability. Liebel found only 27 persons in 1,000 absolutely unhypnotizable, but he was speaking of sick people, of whom a very large proportion are hypnotizable subjects. And even so, he was only able to produce in many of his cases the lighter phases of hypnosis. Dr. Botte has succeeded in producing hypnosis in 1/3 of the persons with whom he attempted it, and this is the percentage which is generally accepted. Delicate and lymphatic women are usually excellent subjects, but, contrary to the common opinion, highly nervous persons are very difficult to hypnotize. Certain physiological conditions naturally predispose to hypnosis, and according to Bermeau, drunkards and persons enfeebled by excess are hypnotized very easily. It is the same with those who suffer from anemia and from all kindred complaints. As for hysterical patients, they are, in their varying degrees, the best subjects for hypnotic influence. That even the animal creation is not entirely insensible to the power of magnetism is shown by the fact that no animal will willingly endure the intent gaze of a man. The lion himself turns away his head. If you have the self-possession to fix your eyes steadily on a snarling dog, he will probably beat a retreat. And animal tamers subdue the most ferocious beasts by the mere fascination of their gaze. Dr. Moutin, in his book Human Magnetism, narrates how, at a public séance given before 1,500 people, he put a little greyhound to sleep by making passes over its head and body. The astonished audience saw the dog sink into a deep slumber, which was not in the least degree disturbed when the animal was pricked with pins, an experiment made by several people, nor even when a pistol was fired into its ear. Dr. Moutin, however, awoke it quite easily and it soon resumed its former liveliness. La Fontaine, who was a great magnetizer without being an inventor of marvels, is responsible for the following curious story. At Tours, in 1840, being in the menagerie of a fair, I attempted, without the knowledge of anyone present, to practice on a lion, placed myself in front of his cage, and fixed my eyes upon him. Soon, unable any longer to bear my gaze, the animal closed his eyes. I then directed on his head the magnetic fluid from one hand, and at the end of 20 minutes he fell into a profound sleep. I now ventured, with all possible precaution, to touch one of its paws, which was near the bars. As he took no notice of this, I grew bolder, and pricked the paw with a pin. But still, the animal did not move. Convinced that I had produced the desired effect, I took his paw and raised it up, touched his head, and put my hand into his jaws. He continued to sleep. Finally, to the astonishment of the spectators, I pricked the lion under the nose without inducing him to stir. Afterwards, I awakened him, and then his behavior at once became such as to offer no temptation for any renewal of familiarities. During my stay at Tours, I made the same experiment several times, always with the same success. And at Nantes, I also practiced on a lion and obtained a similar result. Returning after this digression to magnetism in relation to human beings, we come to a question which deserves considerable attention. The question, namely, of hypnotizing a person against his will. It is obviously impossible to put to sleep anyone who turns away his head and refuses to submit to the necessary procedure, unless indeed the person is an hysteric who can be thrown into a trance by beating a tom-tom, or by some other method similar to those employed by Charcot in his treatment of hysterics. But if the procedure can by any means be gone through, the consent of the subject's will is in no way essential. I proved this myself in the case of a young girl who had a very strong will, and who had declared that she did not intend to allow me to hypnotize her. It was a veritable struggle between her will and mine. Mine proved the stronger, but it required 35 minutes to obtain the desired result. We have already observed that it is not everyone who is hypnotizable, and the question arises as to how we are to discover the sensitives or good subjects. A happy accident revealed to Dr. Moutin a well-nigh infallible means of recognition. One day he was walking in the country with one of his friends, a Monsieur de M., when the latter paused for a moment by the roadside to observe the movements of some insect. The doctor rested his right hand on the shoulder of his friend, whereupon Monsieur de M. at once turned sharply round and exclaimed, "Do take your hand away, you're burning me with your cigarette." The doctor, greatly surprised, protested that he had no cigarette, and again put his hand on the other's shoulder. Monsieur de M. again complained that he was being burned, and on the doctor quickly withdrawing his hand, he staggered and well-nigh fell backwards, as if suffering pain. Moutin, a practiced hypnotizer and a keen observer, suspected at once that there was a mystery to clear up. And as his friend had a brother who was the director of a big factory, the doctor obtained permission to make experiments with the workmen. Of those who offered themselves for treatment, 50 or so in number, 30 presented the same phenomenon as Monsieur de M., though in differing degrees. Then Moutin continued his experiments with persons taken from all classes of society, and discovered that about half of them were more or less suggestible, while a quarter of them possessed suggestibility in a highly accentuated degree. Today, the frontiers of the science of hypnotism are still a little vague and undefined, but with all its mysteries, it has come to be recognized as a real science, unconnected with spiritualism or with the supernatural. There is no reason, therefore, why it should encounter the antagonism of the Church, and as a matter of fact, the papal condemnation of 1856 was directed at the abuse of the practice and not at the practice itself. As the learned Abbé Merrick, a professor of theology, has very reasonably said, the Holy See necessarily distinguishes between the fact of hypnosis and the uses to which unprincipled people can put to it. The assertion, sometimes rashly made, that it is magnetism itself which has been condemned is very exasperating to those who know that this is the reverse of the truth. And here are the words sufficiently categoric with the Bishop of D on November 7th, 1885, addressed to Dr. Mutat, who had given a magnetic seance in the seminary of the Episcopal town. We are grateful to Dr. Mutat for this practical demonstration of a truth which has been recently testified to by the Holy See, namely, that the reality of magnetic phenomena is proved beyond any possibility of doubt, and that the practice is not only permissible but serviceable both to science and the faith when it consists, as in this case our own astonished eyes could testify that it did, simply of the legitimate employment of legitimate physical means. Signed, A. Francois, Bishop of D. The case could hardly be better stated.